This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz, and I'm very excited to be speaking with Jeff Russo about too many projects to name. How are you, Jeff?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks. How are you?
Good, good. I'm a big fan of yours. As soon as I knew I might be talking to you, I immediately thought of the track, the Spanish Italian, and that's not something I can do with a lot of different composers. So that's not like the very focus of our conversation, but we're definitely going to talk a lot about Fargo today.
I'm very excited. Very excited. Some of my favorite projects, one of my favorite projects to work on. So I'm very happy about that.
Well, let's start with coming into season one of Fargo with the existing score from the film and how that sort of worked into each of the five different versions from the five seasons.
Well, so in the first season, the idea for me was how do I create an identity for ourselves without just doing what Carter did in the movie, and yet still retaining the feeling of what the movie was, because it was sort of a transition for me. That was the bridge. I think as we moved into season two and season three and on, it really became its own thing, and there's sort of nothing left of what we heard in the movie, except for that we use Carter's theme um, in every one of every episodes. Actually, in season five, I think we use it twice, um, just to give the viewer that connection, to where we're from and what we sort of base this idea on. But that was the hardest thing. The hardest thing was trying to figure out, like, what is a way for me to build our own identity while still being inside that world. And it was really just a question of finding the right melody and finding the right idea and how to represent what the show is. And I think that part of that originality, or part of that identity, is in the percussion that I do for the show, which definitely moves it away from what was in the movie.
Looking at just some of the track titles, you obviously write a lot to characters specifically. Do you start from that point of, sort of themes for different players in each season?
Yeah, that's basically where I start. Noah sends me scripts before they start shooting, and I start sketching ideas and melodies and themes for the characters and some of the locations and some of the situations. But mainly I work on character work and representing what each individual character is going to sound like. It's not every character that gets a theme, because not every character has that much importance. I mean, they're all important, but they don't need their own sound. But generally speaking, that is where I start.
Let's talk a little about Roy and his whole thing from this season, just because I think that's a particularly fun beat to it. It's sort of threatening, but also I don't even know how to describe it. It's very interesting.
I think that we tend to think of people like him in a, like, almost comedic sense, right? It's not, I mean, it's like, can you believe there's somebody who is that much of a true believer, that they would act this way? They would be like this. It's absurd. And I mean, again, part of the thing that we do is it's this absurdity in reality, right? It's this absurdity, absurd violence, absurd everything. So he's a caricature of himself, and I wanted to make sure that that was represented in the music. But he does represent a very dark side of humanity, and in that I wanted to be very clear, and I wanted to be very aware of what that means to people. He's an evil human being, abusive and self-centered and narcissistic and insane. Um, so I wanted to make sure all of those things were accounted for.
I do want to just spend a minute on the Spanish Italian in season four because I think that is uh, for Fargo throws a lot of characters at you, but there's nothing quite as intense, I think, as season four, and just the sheer number of absurd players on both sides, and just not even both sides. There's more than two sides. Can you talk about the Spanish Italian and just that theme?
Well, it's funny that that theme came from an idea of wanting to have something feel very classical in nature, but to still live in our world. So there's this very rhythmic aspect to the tune. You know, it's very, very rhythmic, but it's also very very melodic, and it has a classical music feel, classical music tone, and yet it still has a bit of an ethnicity to it, which is sort of why I sort of went in a more Spanish flavor in terms of chord changes and melody structure. It's a little more Spanish in nature, um, and and the idea there was, you know, season 4 was a very broad season. There were lots of characters. There was a lot of um there was a lot of a lot. And I wanted to be able to cover a lot with one piece of music. And I have all these movements in that piece of music where it's very rhythmic and then it becomes very sort of stoic and then it becomes very melodic. And I wanted to sort of cover all of those because there were so many different characters. I got a lot out of one bite at the apple.
You have a favorite from the 5 different seasons, so your favorite score, your favorite track?
You know, that's always very difficult. It's always very difficult. The first season has some pieces of music that um I'm very, very fond of. They all the seasons have that. And it's hard for me to say there's one. I mean, there's a piece of music in season 5 that I'm very, very fond of. Lorraine's theme I'm very fond of. I'm also extremely fond of Linda. And which was something that really only happened in that one episode. And but there are, there's music from all of it. I would say that some of my favorite music is derived from Wrench and Numbers, which was the sort of the only theme from an actual standpoint that has transversed all the seasons. Except for our main title theme, except for the main Fargo theme that I wrote. Um, that other theme is really the only one that you hear in some form or another in all the seasons. So I'm a little partial to that one as well.
Have you spoken to Carter Burwell and just his thoughts on your music for this
You
show?
know, I have actually spoken to Carter Burwell, but not specifically about my music for the series. We've spoken about other things. We're, colleagues, and I was a huge fan of his before I had ever made Fargo. So when Noah asked me to do Fargo, I was like, oh my God, big shoes to fill. But I haven't spoken directly to him about that specifically.
While Fargo could certainly take up an hour of our conversation, I do want to touch on a few of the other shows that you could be up for this year, and also some of your past work. Let's talk about Ripley for a second. What was your experience with the book, with the movie, and just approaching this character?
Well, interestingly, I had never seen the movie, still haven't. I've seen bits of the movie. I'm a channel surfer sometimes, so I'll be sitting at home and like flipping through movie channels or whatever, and it's been on actually recently. And I can only think because our show came out that Showtime or whatever it was putting it on. But I've never seen the movie. I did read the novel. And I read the novel after I didn't read the novel prior to doing this, but I of course knew the story. And then when Steve asked me to do this, he asked me, he was like, "Have you seen the movie?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Good, because we're not doing the movie. We are doing it's more like the book. It's really a thriller, and I want to do it in this way that he wanted to shoot it, which is quite noir in its inception and in its conception, I should say. And we really treated the music like that as well. So it was really great for me because I got to sort of really write a lot of thematic material. But what I would typically do is I would typically write, character themes. And the more I wrote, the more I realized that the only character that needed thematic material was Tom. And all the other characters were sort of as they relate to Tom. So it was really more about how I was going to finesse all of that in relation to that particular character, which is why there aren't many like themes related to other characters in name.
And you have something like Star Trek Discovery, which I feel like there's a little bit of history behind Star Trek and its music that has really evolved over the years because it's such a classical but very dated theme that I think of when I picture the original series.
You know, I think the theme itself, the original theme might sound somewhat dated, but the melody is very iconic and very clear. And when I need a quick way to get from point A to point B, which is to move the audience to, you know, connecting with the material, all I have to do is the three notes. Bum, ba, bum. That's really all I have to do. Um, in that, it's like trying to make our modern version of that. Like we are a modern version of Trek. We're not trying to be 1966 whenever it came out. And that that's the thing. So as I have gone through, this is the fifth season of Discovery, and I did two seasons of Picard and wrote the themes for other ones. And the idea is to try to continue to be very aware of the source material, but move us into a modern filmmaking technique and modern score making technique paradigm, And I think that Alex has allowed me the space to do that while staying inside this vernacular. We all know, like, Trek has a sound, big horns, and especially because I take more of a lead from the cinematic world of Star Trek and not the television world of Star Trek. Certainly, the Next Generation, it had a big theme. Obviously, Goldsmith's theme for it was huge. The scores themselves were very subtle, and they were subtle and beautiful, but they were certainly subtle. The way they used music in the '90s for those television incarnations was different than the way we use music now for the series, for any of the series. So we sort of, the idea was to try to manage a sort of updated way of telling the story musically while still being very deferential to the thematic material, which I'm happy to go to. Voyager theme, let's do it. DS9 theme, okay. Original theme, great. um and that's a lot of fun for me. These are incredible composers that have worked on this on this on these projects and in this universe, that to draw on that material is just a lot of fun for me.
And in terms of memorable characters, we also have Bosch Legacy, which is, a really great protagonist. What is the journey with that show been like?
you know that the journey with that show for me is I gotta just stay out of the way. I gotta stay out of the way of a character that is very iconic. People love Bosch. People are really connected to that character. I don't have to do much in the way of trying to manipulate the audience. The story is very clear, and I'm able to stay out of the way and pepper in things that are meaningful for the story in order to really punctuate something and underscore something, but to not be heavy handed. And I really enjoy that part of making that show because I really get to watch Bosch. Titus is an incredible actor, and just watching him do his thing. And I'm like, hi, can I do something? Maybe I don't need to do anything there. He's really got it covered. So that's which is an interesting sort of difference, that kind of programming versus the something like Ripley or Trek specifically.
When we talk about Fargo, every conversation always seems to lead with anyone who's involved behind the scenes with that show to Legion, which is such an incredible show, especially season one and the music there. I can picture scenes when I think of the music. And I feel like usually it's the other way around. You picture a scene and then you think of the music. And that must have, it's such a head trip to watch that show. Is it similar, being part of the musical process there?
I got very, I consider myself to be extremely fortunate that I get to work with a filmmaker like Noah Hawley, who is visionary and has like is so open to art, right? He makes art. That's what he wants to do. And with that show in particular, it was like I got to play in a sandbox that was just wide open and everything that I ever wanted to do in terms of making music. I grew up listening to Pink Floyd. I grew up listening to sort of that kind of music. And, I've always dreamed of like making music that was very cinematic in nature and had this orchestral component, but also had this sort of trippy rock component and this sort of more synthesizery type thing. I just had dreamed about making music like that. And as soon as I started talking to Noah about Legion, what I realized and he realized, we were both envisioning the same thing at the same time. And that was really incredible. That on top of the fact that I got to make all these cool covers with Noah singing, which was a lot of fun to do. But yeah, making that show was, certainly a highlight in my life and in my career because just of how open everybody was to you know to a different type of idea of storytelling. It was nonlinear storytelling from the narrative point of view and from the musical point of view, which I thought was really, really intriguing.
If you gave me the power to bring back 5 shows that have been canceled too soon and I could choose, Counterpart would definitely be very high at the top of that list. And that's one where I think the music is very specific in terms of setting like a moody, haunting tone, but it's also a thriller. Let's talk about that for a minute.
We started in season one, with the idea that there was two different types of storytelling, one on either side of the tunnel, right? And one in either timeline. And then what we realized, or what I realized, is it's a unified feeling, right? Like the people on the one side and the people on the other side, it's like they all musically seemed to cross over and it became more of an emotional storytelling. But I would agree with you, like that show got canceled way too soon and it was such a great show and it was such an interesting way to tell a story that when we found out that we weren't coming back for season three, I called Justin. I was like, we got to figure like, what can we do? Let's make a movie or something. And of course that didn't happen because he went off and did Shogun, but that, which is great and totally great. But I was super bummed that when that one went away, totally.
I'm very impressed by your range, and I was surprised when scrolling through your very, very lengthy IMDb credits page, to see a film that I saw at Sundance and haven't heard much about since, which is Rob Peace.
Ah. I just found out that it's coming out. It's
Okay.
getting a theatrical release and then will end up on a streamer, I think. But that movie was, that's a labor of love, really. I really loved the story and I really loved Chiwetel's telling of that story. Um, so writing an emotional piece like that where there is, a higher than reality sort of component to it, because the story is sort of being told from a 30,000 foot view, in my opinion. Um, and then yet still trying to stay grounded with the character, um, is really, really, it's been really interesting. It was really interesting to do.
I like to ask everyone I speak to for awards buzz the same question towards the end, and I think based on the way you talk with reverence for all these other composers and projects, that you'll have a very interesting answer. If is there another composer whose TV score this season really speaks to you and you think is particularly awards worthy?
Hmm. I'm trying to think if there was another show that I'd watched that was really, you know, really my thing. Um, I I was, I haven't had a chance to really catch up on television, so it's difficult to say. Um, I was watching the Three Body Problem. I think that was really good. I'm a fan of Ramin's to begin with, so it didn't surprise me that I was like, oh, this is pretty good. This is, I like this, and I'm liking how this is being scored, and I'm liking that whole thing. That was very interesting to me. Um, I'm trying to think of what else I've just seen. Oh, yeah, Silo. I really liked Silo. I really liked the score for Silo. I think Otley does a great job. Really does.
Awesome. Well, I
Mm,
appreciate getting to dig so much into, again, just a small fraction of what you've done, and I look forward to hearing what you do next.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your time, Jeff.
You're very welcome.